This woman murdered her husband of 38 years after discovering that he had been abusing her children. People are demanding that she be released from prison. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the case of Corinna Smith. In early July 2020, 59-year-old Corinna is sat with her daughter having a conversation when she hears something that she never thought she would hear. Corinna's daughter confided in her that both she and her brother Craig had been SA'd for years throughout their childhood by Corinna's husband and now 81-year-old Michael. Craig had actually took his own life in 2007 when he was in his mid-20s, and for many years following it, Corinna would blame herself for what happened. But upon remembering one of the final things that Craig ever said to her, now Corinna is putting the pieces together. Only a few days before his death, Craig would tell Corinna, quote, "Mum, he's a paedophile." But Corinna would have never expected that Craig was talking about Michael. Just a couple of days prior, Craig had been in an altercation with another man, and so she just assumed that's who Craig was talking about. When she saw Craig the next day, he seemed happy and in high spirits, and so she didn't think to question him on that comment any further. But now, as she is hearing this from her daughter, she's putting the pieces together, realising that Craig must have been talking about Michael. At the time of this case, in July 2020, Michael is 81 years old and his health is deteriorating. Corinna dedicates her days to looking after Michael, caring for him, making sure that he's okay, but not after what she has just discovered. On the 14th of July 2020, Corinna would fill up a large garden bucket with boiling water and then poured in 3 kilograms of sugar. She carried this into their shared bedroom where Michael was laid asleep on the bed and doused him in the hot sugary mix. The mix landed on his arms and torso and burned away his skin, causing Michael to scream in pain. Adding sugar to the boiled water makes the mixture thicker, stickier, and so it makes it easier to stick to the skin so that it seeps in more, causing maximum damage. After pouring this over Michael, Corinna would leave the house and she began knocking on all of our neighbours' doors. She would knock on 9 doors until one neighbour finally answered. Corinna told them, quote, "I've hurt him really bad. I think I killed him." Police were called and quickly arrived to the home where they found 81-year-old Michael in excruciating pain, whimpering with his skin peeling off. He would be rushed into the hospital where he was immediately taken into emergency surgery for many skin grafts. Following the surgery, he would spend around about 4 weeks in the hospital recovering. However, on the 18th of August 2020, he would succumb to his injuries, dying in the hospital. At Chester Crown Court, Corinna tried to enter a plea of manslaughter due to loss of control, but she would be found guilty of murder. One of the main reasons that the jury did not accept the manslaughter plea was because they didn't believe it was loss of control, partly because it took Corinna 13 minutes to fill up the bucket with the boiling water and stir in the sugar. That didn't ring true to the jury as someone who had just snapped and someone who had just lost control. To them, it didn't reflect a heat of the moment murder. She was found guilty on the 15th of June 2021 and would be handed a sentence of life imprisonment with a minimum of 12 years to serve.
His life was taken by police officers for wanting to see the same movie twice. 26-year-old Robert Ethan Saylor was from Frederick County, Maryland. Ethan was described as a fun-spirited young man who adored police officers, loved reggae music, and the show NCIS. On January 12th of 2013, Ethan went to the movie theater with his caregiver to go see the movie Zero Dark 30. Once the movie was over, his caregiver left him in the lobby while she went to go get the car. Ethan went back to the theater to watch the movie again. An employee saw Ethan re-enter the theater and told him that he needed to buy another ticket or leave. Ethan did not understand why she wanted him to leave the theater, nor did he have any money with him. Ethan ignored the employee and used his phone to try and understand the situation better. The staff member then called mall security to try and remove Ethan. 3 off-duty officers were working as mall security that day, and they responded to the movie theater. Once Ethan's caregiver was back at the theater, she told management to tell officers that Ethan had Down syndrome and if she could be with him. They refused, but she asked them not to touch him because he might freak out. But the theater staff and officers ignored the caregiver. Instead, officers approached Ethan while he was in the movie theater along with 20 other people waiting to watch their movie. Officers told Ethan that he needed to leave the theater, but he refused. He started cussing and he threw a temper tantrum. Those 3 officers forcibly removed Ethan from his seat and tried to put him into handcuffs. There was a struggle and officers threw Ethan to the ground on his stomach. One officer placed his knee on Ethan's back and fell forcibly on top of him. Ethan was crying and screaming, saying, "Mommy, it hurts," and then the room fell silent. The officers had handled Ethan so violently that they crushed his larynx, which is a part of the throat. Ethan was transported to the hospital where he was pronounced dead. An autopsy revealed that Ethan had suffered from bruising and abrasions to his face and body and a fracture in his throat cartilage. A forensic pathologist stated that this only occurs with force and including in cases of manual strangulation. The grand jury failed to indict the 3 officers in any wrongdoing. They returned to work as normal and returned to their life as normal. Meanwhile, Ethan's family were grieving the loss of him, but they ended up filing a lawsuit against those 3 officers and they were given a $1.9 million settlement.
One of the most infamous serial killer couples, Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka, they were coined the Barbie and Ken killers because they were attractive and blonde. Honestly, kind of weird. So the story really begins in the late 80s in Scarborough, where for a 3-year time period, young women were terrified because there was a serial R-worder attacking women from behind and SAing them. Over a dozen young women, mostly teens, were attacked, and this serial R-worder wouldn't leave behind any evidence and no one would see his face until, I don't know if it was confidence or carelessness, but he let one of his victims see his face and they were able to create a composite sketch, which had an uncanny resemblance to 25-year-old Paul Bernardo. They questioned Paul, but because he had a boyish charm, came from a good family, had a good, pretty girlfriend, he was able to talk himself out of it. Paul Bernardo even willingly gave the investigators some of his DNA, which they did not test, which is crazy because if they only would have tested that and found out that he was a serial R-word, the tragic events that followed would have never happened. Paul was engaged to marry Karla Homolka, but there was an issue. Paul liked purity and, well, he wouldn't be Karla's first, if you know what I mean. So Karla decided that she was going to give her husband-to-be a gift, and that gift was that she was going to let him SA her baby sister, 15-year-old Tammy. So Paul and Karla gave Tammy some medicine and some alcohol so she would pass out, but there were some complications and she actually ended up passing away, which was actually ruled as accidental. Her parents were grieving so much, but Karla seemed okay. She actually went on to have her wedding with Paul only a few months later, this really big, elaborate, fairy tale-esque wedding. And at the same time that Paul and Karla were saying "I do," the dismembered remains of their second victim was being found. Yep, that's right. Immediately following her sister's death, Karla went on to help Paul abduct, SA, and unalive another teenage girl, 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey. Women in this area are literally terrified because first there's a serial R-worder running around, and now the body of a 14-year-old girl has been found. Women in this area were on high alert, which in a really sick way helped lead Paul and Karla to their third victim. 15-year-old Kristen French was really terrified after the discovery of Leslie's body. She was actually educating other young girls to not travel alone. So when Kristen saw Karla alone pretending to look lost, she offered to help her, and that's when Paul forced her into their vehicle. They tortured and SA'd Kristen for days before unaliving her as well. Shortly after this, Paul started to victimize his wife Karla as well, and I guess she was okay helping him hurt other young girls, but not being a victim herself, because she immediately took her ass into a police office and started confessing everything. They offered Karla a plea deal to testify against her husband Paul. He received a life sentence, but today, due to the plea deal, Karla Homolka is out, free, living her life, married with 3 kids. He claims that she's not dangerous and she was a victim and an unwilling participant, but they actually filmed all of their attacks, which showed Karla not being only very willing, but looking like she enjoyed herself as well. Actually, there's a lot of people that believe that Karla is more dangerous than Paul, and that she was kind of the driving force behind all the violence. Like, Paul was SAing girls before Karla, but it wasn't until after Karla that he started to murder people.
Their prank took the life of a dictator's brother. 25-year-old Siti Aisha was born into poverty in a small Indonesian village. As a teenager, she dropped out of school to support her family, and after a failed marriage, she became a single mother. In order to keep supporting her family, she left her son with her parents and moved to Malaysia to work as a masseuse at a local hotel. The work was tough, but she managed to send money home back to her family. She fantasized about becoming a model or an actress, and she hoped that one day she would get that chance. One night outside of the bar, Siti was approached by a well-dressed man who went by the name James. He asked her if she ever acted before and she said no, so he invited her to a nearby cafe and told her that he was a Japanese TV producer. James specialized in hidden camera prank shows. His proposal to Siti was simple: just wear flashy clothes, pull pranks on strangers, and get paid for it. It seemed too good to be true because it was. Siti agreed, and over the next several weeks she was flown across cities with James and his so-called producers. They told her she was a star in Korea and her confidence grew. James showed Siti a text from his boss stating that she was already famous and she believed him. At this point, Siti was excited and happy with her life. She celebrated her birthday at a Hard Rock cafe with her friends and producers from the supposed Japanese TV show. When they brought out the cake to her, she didn't even make a wish because she felt like her life had transformed into something she had always wished for. On the morning of February 13th of 2017, Siti wore a dark, form-fitting outfit, red lipstick, and met with the team outside of the hotel. She was excited for this day's shoot, and she was told that she was going to be working with 28-year-old actress Don Thai Hoang from Vietnam. Just like Siti, Don had been lured into this production as well. The two were just chatting in a Malaysian airport waiting for the prank to begin. Don was wearing a shirt that said LOL on the front and was holding onto a teddy bear. Finally, the producers pointed out a man to the two and said that that was their target. He was a middle-aged man carrying a briefcase heading to the self-check-in kiosk, and it was time to act. Siti grabbed a small spray bottle which she assumed was a perfume. Producers rubbed a substance onto Don's hand and gave her a damp cloth. Together, the two women followed the man through the crowd, and as rehearsed, they flanked him. Siti sprayed the liquid onto his face while Don put the cloth onto his cheeks. The man staggered and the woman giggled, apologized, and went into separate directions. Siti was looking at herself in the bathroom mirror, smiling, fixing her hair, and believed that she had nailed it. But when she went to the pawn meeting spot, no one was there. She checked the airport, the taxi area, texted James, and there was no response. Siti was feeling frustrated and sick and just ended up getting a cab and went back to her hotel. Along the way, she got so nauseous that she had to ask her cab driver to pull over so she could vomit. When she got to her room, she collapsed, still wearing all her clothes, and fell onto her bed. She woke up hours later and she was expecting an apology or text from James, but there was nothing. The next morning, there was still no text message and James's phone was turned off. Siti was confused and heartbroken, so she decided she was going to return home. Once she was at the airport, she heard shouting and armed police officers were running towards her. She stepped to the side because she assumed that they were after someone else, but they grabbed her, turned her around, and placed her under arrest. Siti laughed and said, "Oh, this is a prank, huh?" And they said, "No, this is real," and she was arrested for murder. As Siti was being placed into custody, she thought all of this was because of a prank show, but what she didn't know was that the guy she had sprayed wasn't an actor. He was Kim Jong-nam, the half-brother of dictator Kim Jong-un. To make matters worse, he had been assassinated. Security footage revealed that after the prank, Kim stumbled away from the kiosk and complained about dizziness and pain. Staff were concerned about him, so they led him to an airport clinic, and then he collapsed into seizures. Kim was placed into an ambulance and died on the way to the hospital. Kim was killed by VX nerve agent, a chemical weapon so toxic that it's banned under international law. Once it's absorbed through the skin, it shuts down the nervous system, causes seizures, and leads to death in just a couple of minutes. Once Siti and Don had did that to Kim, James and his producers vanished. They fled Malaysia on separate flights immediately. James was no Japanese prank producer. His real name was Ri Ji-on, and he was an operative for North Korea. His mission was clear, and it was to kill Kim. To avoid fingerprints, he tricked Siti and Don to do the dirty work for him. Once this came out, the world was stunned, and it was clear that Siti and Don were victims as well. Malaysian authorities had arrested both women for murder, and once video evidence came out, it was clear that they were tricked. Eventually, prosecutors dropped the charges, and both women were released from prison after serving nearly 2 years. They returned to their home countries, traumatized but alive. As for those agents, they have never been brought to justice.
The infamous case of the woman that cut off her husband's manhood. When Lorena married John Bobbitt, she thought that it was going to be happily ever after. But in reality, John started hurting Lorena the second they tied the knot. Physically, emotionally, and then he started essaying her. This guy was a huge a-hole. Unemployed while his wife worked 2 jobs, forced Lorena to end a pregnancy that she wanted to keep. Cheating on her. On top of all of that, he would go out, get super drunk every night, then come home and essay Lorena. Then one night in June of 1993, after John essayed his wife and passed out drunk, his wife Lorena went to the kitchen to get herself a glass of water, where a large cutting instrument was in plain view, which Lorena took back into her bedroom and cut off John's member. She then got in her car and left and threw it out the car window. But somehow they were able to find it in time and reattach it after a 9-hour surgery. There was actually 2 trials in this story, one for what Lorena did to John and one for what John did to Lorena, and they were actually both found not guilty. They obviously divorced and went on to live very different lives. Today, Lorena is a wife and mother, and also the founder of her own foundation against domestic violence. After the incident, John went on to star in some adult movies. Today, he's unemployed and has been married and divorced 3 times. And just last week, he publicly announced that after drinking contaminated water, he had to have all 10 of his toes recently amputated, which doctors were unable to reattach.
She begged the police for help. Someone was following her absolutely everywhere, and then the police found a murder kit full of axes and knives. But they did absolutely nothing, and you can probably guess how this one ends. Gracie Spinks was a stunning girl from Chesterfield in the UK. She was 23 years old, and she enjoyed living where she did. I feel like Chesterfield has got a good reputation. It feels like a lovely place to live. She was beautiful, hardworking, intelligent, and she also had this super creative side to her. She was amazing at art and had a really charismatic personality. She was destined for a really bright future until somebody stole that away from her in the most disgusting, cruel way ever. It was 2020 and Gracie was working in a warehouse. Now, she had previously worked here with a guy called Michael Sellers. He was 35 and he'd actually been her supervisor before, but he was obsessed with Gracie. He made his feelings really clear and asked her out numerous times, to which she declined. She wasn't interested in him at all. But as the weeks and months started going on, it became really clear that he was not going to take no for an answer. And Gracie was a really keen horse rider. She actually had her own horse called Paddy, and she kept Paddy at a stable called the Blue Lodge Farm in Duckmanton. If anyone watching has ever looked after a horse or had their own horse, you know that you often have to look after these horses a lot and go up on your own in the middle of the night or early morning to clean out the horses, look after the horses. It's a full-time job. She would often do this. She'd be going to the stables, checking on her horse, making sure he was all okay. But she was super creeped out in February 2021. This was to the point where she rang police. She was like, Michael, who I know, who I used to work with, is stalking me at these stables. He's lurking around and it's kind of in the middle of nowhere, so why the hell would he be there? He's just lurking, staring at me. She warned police that he was a dangerous guy. He was incredibly weird and obsessive, and she warned the police that he could kidnap someone. But, and this honestly drives me insane, the police decided to just talk to Michael and give him a few words of advice and let him go. Bear in mind, some other context to this story is the fact that Michael had actually been dismissed from work for being incredibly creepy with women. It turns out he'd harassed a total of 8 women before even getting to Gracie. 4 of these women had been brave enough to come forward to their manager and say that they were really concerned about him. But it didn't help. He was just allowed to carry on with his behaviour. Shortly after this, after Gracie raised her concerns with the police, some dog walkers found this really bizarre bag, and they noticed this because it wasn't just a random Tesco bag or something. This was an actual backpack. They looked inside this bag to see maybe if there was any clues as to who it belonged to, and they were stunned by what was inside. This was like a bag of horrors. There were loads of terrifying weapons inside, and I'm not talking random a kitchen knife or a little hunting weapon. This bag had a full-on axe inside. There was a giant hunting knife. I can't put the picture on here for obvious reasons, but you can find it on Google. Now, this bag was found incredibly close to Gracie's stables, where she was and where Michael had been creeping around watching her. So the people did the right thing. They rang police, and you would think that at this point police would take some kind of action. No, this was classed as just found property, and nothing was done. Despite the fact that there was clearly going to be DNA evidence in this bag, like there was a water bottle inside and some clothing, I believe, the police said that they weren't going to be taking any further action. There was also a note inside this bag that said, "Don't lie," in capital letters. Like, clearly whoever packed this bag was not mentally stable. On the 18th of June 2021, the day started totally normally. Gracie's mum last saw her at 7:30 a.m. that morning when Gracie left to go to the stables, and Gracie's mum had no idea that would be the last time she ever saw her daughter alive. As Gracie did her normal morning duties at the stable, she was being watched. Suddenly, totally out of nowhere, Michael launched a vicious attack on the young girl. She stood absolutely no chance. He stabbed her in a frenzied attack, severing her spinal cord. He then cowardly ran away into a nearby field. Now, when Gracie was originally found, it was thought that she'd maybe fell off a horse and been kicked, and that's why she was not responsive. But then it became really clear that she'd got very severe stab wounds. Emergency services rushed to the scene, but tragically they could not save her. Sadly, she was declared dead just before 9 a.m. that day. Emergency services were then obviously in a massive race to try and locate her killer. Clearly this dangerous man was on the loose, and obviously police hadn't actioned this before. Now they realised they actually had to. But the hunt didn't last long. Just before 11 a.m. that same morning, police did find Michael Sellers deceased. He was dead in a field less than a mile away, and it was believed that he'd unalived himself by gas asphyxiation. An inquest did prove that Gracie had been unlawfully killed, and Derbyshire police had to apologise to her family. But it's like, what's an apology going to do? It's not going to bring Gracie back. Her family did set up the Gracie's Law petition to raise awareness about stalking and taking it more seriously. What do you think? Do you think this was just a tragic oversight, or do you think this was completely mishandled? Because honestly, this case boils my blood.
This case is one of Australia's darkest murders. She was obsessed with her, and so she killed her to try and become her. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the murder of Rachel Barber. The Barber family lived in Victoria, Australia. This consisted of parents Elizabeth and Michael and their 3 girls, Rachel, Ashley Rose and Heather. Growing up, Rachel lived a very simple, happy, carefree life. She grew up being surrounded by animals, including cats, dogs, chickens and cows. The Barbers were an incredibly imaginative and creative family. Michael worked as a toy designer, Elizabeth was really into literature, Heather sang, Ashley was a musician, she was very talented at playing the flute, and Rachel was an exceptional classical dancer. Rachel attended a mainstream school for some time, however while here she really struggled. English, maths and science wasn't where her heart lay, and she began developing anxiety. She feared doing things alone, including going to the shops by herself, going on public transport. She couldn't talk to strangers, she was terrified of the dark. And all of this was really having a knock-on effect on her confidence. With the help and support of Elizabeth and Michael, Rachel would be enrolled into a dance school in Richmond, and as soon as she went here, she began to absolutely flourish. Her anxieties began to ease, she was happy, she was confident, and she was doing something that she absolutely loved. Due to her sweet, kind and warm nature, people naturally gravitated towards Rachel, which meant that she was very popular. And she even got into a relationship with a boy named Emmanuel Manny Corella, and the two were described as the perfect young couple. Since moving to the dance school, Rachel really began living her best life. On the morning of the 1st of March 1999, Michael would drop off his 15-year-old daughter Rachel at the train station, telling her that he loved her and to have a good day and that he would be there at 6:15 that evening to collect her, like he was every other day. However, by the time 6:15 rolled around, Rachel didn't show. Thinking that maybe she'd just missed the train, Michael sat and again started waiting for his daughter, but he would watch as each train went by and there was no sign of Rachel. Eventually, Michael decided to head back home. Maybe Rachel had somehow made her way back home by herself. However, to his horror, when he arrived, Rachel wasn't there either. Elizabeth and Michael began calling around Rachel's friends to see if she was with any of them or if any of them had seen them, but no one had. When they they spoke to Manny, he told her parents that that date Rachel had been secretive and she'd been evasive about this job that she was doing that evening. She was doing this job so that she could buy herself some new dancing shoes, and as soon as Manny said this, Elizabeth knew what he was referring to. Rachel had already asked her parents if she could get these new dance shoes, but they were over $100 and the family just couldn't afford to pull out $100 on a pair of shoes. I mean, really, who can? Manny said that Rachel had reassured him not to worry about her at all because she was doing this job with an old trusted friend. It wasn't as if she was running off with some randomer. It would be one of Rachel's fellow classmates at the school that gave police their best tip. The classmate described being on the same train as Rachel and seeing Rachel sitting with another girl who was slightly older than she was. Two girls clearly knew each other. They were chatting, they were joking, they were carrying on, and they seemed very comfortable with one another. Both of the girls got off of the train together at Prahan. Police began to trace the phone calls that had been coming into the family home in the days leading up to Rachel's disappearance, and two calls specifically stood out. These calls came from a blocked or an unknown number, and it was narrowed down that Michael hadn't taken that call, Elizabeth hadn't, and neither had the other girls, so it must have been Rachel who took the call. Because this is something they are able to do, the police were able to kind of unblock the number to reveal the number and see who that number belonged to. And after retrieving this name, the officers would go to Michael and Elizabeth and asked if they knew anyone by the name of Caroline Reed Robertson. Hearing that name, a wave of relief rushed over the parents because yes, they did know Caroline. Caroline was their babysitter, a girl who was just older than Rachel. A lovely, responsible girl who they trusted, and upon hearing this, they thought that maybe Rachel and Caroline had just took off together and went off on a little spontaneous trip or something like that, and that if Rachel was with Caroline, she was safe. Unfortunately, however, they would be terribly wrong. 19-year-old Caroline became introduced to the Barber family when one of her younger sisters befriended one of the younger Barber children. She would end up babysitting for the Barbers, who generally liked her. Why else would they leave their daughters with her? Unbeknownst to the family, Caroline developed an obsession, a fixation on 15-year-old Rachel. Caroline would compare herself to Rachel constantly. To her, Rachel was radiant. She was beautiful with dark hair and striking green eyes, and she would describe herself as having oily brown hair, overweight, and was pizza-faced. Rachel was a gifted dancer and she had no coordination. Rachel had a promising career in dancing and even a little bit of modelling, and Caroline worked a desk job for a phone company. As time went on, Caroline's obsession with Rachel manifested into something deadly. Caroline decided that she didn't just want to be like Rachel, she wanted to be Rachel, and in order to be Rachel, she had to get Rachel out of the picture. Caroline would lure Rachel to her apartment under the pretense of doing a psychological study, and in exchange for this, she would pay her $100. Once inside, the girls ate some pizza, unbeknownst to Rachel that Caroline had spiked her slices with drugs. Caroline began performing a relaxation exercise on Rachel, and once a drowsy Rachel did become relaxed and her eyes closed, Caroline quickly wrapped an electric phone wire around Rachel's neck and began to squeeze. In vain, Rachel tried her best to fight her off and to pull away at the wire, but she was drugged. So there was nothing that she could do. During this altercation, Caroline is eerily telling her to think happy and positive thoughts. After Rachel's body went limp, Caroline would stuff her inside of a wardrobe where she would stay for 2 days. Eventually, Caroline would wrap up Rachel's body with the black cord still tied around her neck in 2 rugs and then force her into an army bag before transporting her to some of her dad's farmland in Kilmore, burying Rachel in amongst some trees within the family pet cemetery. When police arrived to question Caroline, they would discover her unconscious on her bedroom floor, having had a seizure, likely brought on by the stress of police closing in on her. She would be whisked off to the hospital, where she would go on to coldly confess to a detective. telling them that she had murdered Rachel, there was no saving her, and that she had already buried her. At Caroline's apartment, investigators would discover evidence that proved that this was a premeditated murder. In her diary, there was several entries detailing what she was going to do, and one entry read in part, quote, "Drug Rachel, brackets, toxic over mouth, put body into army bags, disfigure and dump somewhere way out." They also discovered that she had put in an application for Rachel's birth certificate, that she had also put an application in for a $10,000 loan from the bank. Likely she was going to use this money to run away with and take on Rachel's identity. It was also reported that Caroline had planned to do several cosmetic procedures in order to look like Rachel Moore. This included getting a nose job, dyeing her hair, losing weight, stuff that she thought would make her resemble Rachel Moore. In October 2000, Caroline Reed Robertson would plead guilty to murder. She would be handed a sentence of 20 years to serve with a minimum term of 14.5 years. She was released on parole in January 2015 despite never showing any remorse for the murder of Rachel Barber.
This is the story of Robert Harris. Robert was doomed from the start. When he was 8, he seen his father kill his mother, then commit suicide. He dropped out of school in the 9th grade, and when he was 15, he assaulted a mall clerk and burglarized his auntie's home. When he found out that she called the cops on him, he struck her with the hammer so hard that he broke the hammer. He spent 2 years in juvenile for that. In 1991, he committed 3 more burglaries. He initially received probation, but ended up serving 8 years for fleeing a treatment program. He spent most of his prison time in segregation because of behavioral problems. He would set his cell on fire, and he would threaten to kill the inmates and staff, on top of sexual misconduct. He was paroled in 1999, but that same year, November 29th, Robert abducted and fatally shot 37-year-old Sandra Scott. Robert was taken in for questioning, but they had no evidence, so he was not charged for that. March 15th, 2000, Robert masturbated in front of a female customer at his workplace, Mighty Fine Car Wash in Irvington, Texas. The woman reported the incident, the police were called, and Robert was sent back to jail that day and fired 2 days later. On March 19th, Robert borrowed a car from a friend and a pistol from another friend, and the very next day he was up at the car wash before opening hours. As the first 3 employees arrived, he rushed them to the back office and made 46-year-old Rhonda Wheeler open up the safe. As she was opening up the safe, 3 more employees arrived, and he forced all of them to the ground and shot each and every one of them in the back of the head. One survived but was left disabled. When the last employee arrived, Jason Shield, he see everybody dead on the floor. He immediately runs to the donut shop across the street to call 911. Robert follows him all the way to the donut shop, took the phone and talked to 911 operators himself, then proceeded to rob the donut shop, got away with $4,000. He fled the scene and took the car he borrowed back. He bought some new clothes with that $4,000 and checked into a hotel. He was arrested the next day leaving that hotel. He later told detectives that he was planning on driving to Florida and killing his ex-girlfriend. He also confessed to a 1999 unsolved murder case of a young lady by the name of Sandra Scott. He even led the police to her body. He said that he think that she stole some money from him. Robert Harris was charged with capital murder, and on September 29, 2000, he was sentenced to death. And almost exactly 2 years later, September 20th, 2012, he was executed by lethal injection. He wasn't on death row long. Death row, they usually be on death row for a minute. They wanted to get Robert up out of here, boy. He was a menace.
They snatched their baby and vanished into the night, and honestly the manhunt for these two was like an absolute race against the clock to save that baby's life. It was a freezing night in January 2023 near Bolton, and emergency services were called due to a car being on fire. But when the fire service actually got to the car, they realised something was seriously wrong. This wasn't just your average Peugeot burning by the side of the road. There was something in that car that was so disturbing. None of them had ever seen anything like it before. Inside that car was a placenta wrapped in a towel. A baby had very clearly been born inside that car, and now the baby and the parents were nowhere to be seen. So obviously immediately all they had to go off was this car. So they popped the number plate through the system and worked out who the car belonged to. And it was actually a woman called Constance Martin and her boyfriend, Mark Gordon. Now, disturbingly, Mark was actually a convicted S offender. This was clearly terrifying. I mean, why is a convicted S offender on the run with a baby in the mum? So straight away, this is an extremely dangerous and serious situation. They knew they had to kind of like try and piece a timeline together of where these people had gone to. So they were looking everywhere at all of the CCTV footage that they could find. And they actually managed to put a pretty successful timeline together. So the couple had hitched lifts and got taxis through Liverpool, Essex, London, and then ended up in Brighton. It kind of felt like at Brighton, the trail came to an end. And I don't know if anybody else does, but I very vividly remember this being all over the news. Like, they were hunting for this couple, their faces were plastered everywhere, just public appeal after public appeal, helicopters in the sky, the lot. So thankfully that meant that there were a lot of eyes on this case and on these people, and they were finally hunted down in Brighton on the 27th of February. But it wasn't over. They didn't have a baby with them. And they were pretty silent on this to begin with. So police were like, oh shit, we basically just need to hunt everywhere and try and find this little child. It was literally a race against the clock. Not only was this a vulnerable newborn, but it was also really, really cold out. So hundreds of officers were just everywhere. Volunteers were getting involved, just scouring the area, trying to look for this little baby. And just days later, a heartbreaking discovery. In an overgrown allotment in a little plastic bag was the body of a tiny baby girl. So the baby's little body, bless her, was taken away to determine what the cause of death actually was. I don't think that they ever conclusively stated exactly what it was, but I believe there was talk of this potentially having been a smothering. Now, obviously, the parents, they'd been found, they were charged. This was with concealing the birth of a child, cruelty to a person under 16, causing or allowing the death of a child, manslaughter by gross negligence, and perverting the course of justice. During the trial, just crazy details kept coming out. The couple had actually been hitching lifts and sleeping on the streets. The baby was said to have always been seen like being kind of smuggled under Constance's coat. And by the time they actually were arrested, it's believed that this baby may have been dead weeks. So one of my biggest questions at the time of this case was like, why? It just didn't make sense to me. I was thinking, why run in the first place if the baby's alive at that point? Defense claimed that this couple had 4 children taken off them already. I mean, that speaks volumes. And they said that they were just scared over fear that this would happen again. Constance then said that ultimately she fell asleep hugging the baby and woke up and she was unresponsive, and this was all just a horrible accident. But regardless, they still put that baby in a really ridiculously unsafe and very vulnerable position. She didn't get any medical care. She was outside in the freezing cold. This was a massive risk, and they knew this. They were literally sleeping rough with the baby in freezing temperatures. So after a retrial, I believe that they were convicted of gross negligence manslaughter. They were both given 14 years in prison, and I feel like I have my own opinions on that. I don't feel like that's long enough. What do you guys think? Do you think there should be tougher sentences?
This is the story of Catherine Knight. In 1993, after cheating on her then boyfriend, John Chillingworth, with this man, John Price, Kathy and John decided they was going to go ahead and be in a relationship. Now, John was already aware about Kathy's violent reputation. His friends and everybody around town was trying to warn him anyway, but he didn't care. He loved her. So he moved her in 1995 with him and his 3 children. His children loved Kathy. John was making a good living working at the local mines. Things was all good until it wasn't. In 1998, Catherine was pressuring John to marry her, but he kept telling her he was not ready. But she didn't like that answer, so in retaliation, she recorded items around the house that he took from work and sent them in to his boss. Even though the items were out-of-date medical kits, they still fired John after he had been with that company for 17 years. That same day, he threw Catherine's ass up out of there, and word spread through the town rather quickly, and John's friends, they was happy. But a few months later, he got back with her. He just didn't let her move in this time, but he lost his friends behind that. February 27th, 2000, after an argument, Catherine stabbed John in the chest, and even though the injuries were minor, he still kicked her out the house. February 28th, the very next day, on his way to work, he stopped and got a restraining order on Catherine for him and his children. Once he got to work, he told his co-worker, "If I do not come to work tomorrow, please come and check on me." John's co-workers begged him not to go home, but he said he was scared if he didn't, that Catherine would try to do something to his children. When he returned home from work that day, he noticed that Catherine was not here. I know he was like, thank the Lord. He seen his neighbor outside and decided to have a drink with him, chill for a little bit, and he went to bed around 11 p.m. Catherine crept in the house around 12, took a shower, put on some black lingerie, and she was trying to get her some that night, and John gave it to her, and they fell asleep after. Around 6 a.m. the next day, the neighbor got a little suspicious when he seen that John's car was still in the driveway, and his boss noticed that he did not show up for work, so he sent the co-worker out to see what was going on. The neighbor and the co-worker are banging on John's window but got nothing, so they went around to the front door and noticed it was blood on it. They immediately called 911. When the police got there, they kicked down the door and seen John's body covered in blood, with Catherine laying across him, comatose, with a big bottle of pills by her side. She had stabbed John with a butcher knife while he was sleeping. Evidence shows that he had tried to get up and escape, made it to the front door, but she drug him back in and he bled out on the floor. Once she noticed John was dead, she went to the ATM and withdrew $1,000 from his account. The autopsy showed that she stabbed John 37 times, and several hours after he died, she skinned him. Yes, skinned him, and hung his skin on meat hooks. She then decapitated and cooked parts of his body, served it up with baked potatoes, carrots, cabbage, zucchini, yellow squash, gravy, pumpkin. They don't even go together. Catherine set up the dinner table, made 3 plates, and put a note by it with the name of each of John's children. She was preparing to feed them their father. When the police got there, John's head was still in the pot on the stove, and they said the pot was still warm, so she had to been cooking in the wee hours of the morning. Now, when she woke up out that coma after she took them bottles of pills, she claimed she don't remember nothing. Look at her. March 2nd, 2001, they offered Catherine a plea deal, but she rejected it. She said she wasn't guilty. She took it to trial, October 2001, and she was found guilty November 2001. Catherine Knight was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She's actually the first woman in Australia to be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She is still alive. This is the most recent picture of her. She is serving her time in Australia. But cooking people? Catherine!
This is the last known footage of Riley Strain, a 22-year-old college student who recently went missing after getting kicked out of a Nashville bar. Riley was last seen by his friends at around 9:52 p.m. on March 8th after he was kicked out of Luke Bryan's bar in downtown Nashville called Luke's 32 Bridge. Riley is a senior at the University of Missouri and was on an annual spring trip with his frat brothers. According to his parents, Riley was overserved and was trying to pay his tab when he was kicked out of the bar. He then became separated from his friends, who lost sight of him. Immediately after he left the bar, a friend called him, and on that phone call, Riley said that he was headed back to their hotel, which was only about 5 blocks away. But Riley never made it back, and he hasn't been seen or heard from since. That night, his friends reportedly spent hours looking for him and even trying to use Snapchat to find his location. But when they couldn't find him, and after their following calls went straight to voicemail, they reported him missing to Nashville police. They then called Riley's parents the next day to inform them of what happened, and they drove from Missouri to Nashville to start looking for him. Riley was seen on surveillance footage multiple times the night he went missing. At around 9:40 9:45 p.m., right after leaving the bar, he was seen on CCTV from a local business called Downtown Smoke and Vape Shop stumbling down the street. You can then see him fall down, get back up, and start running. Then at around 9:47 p.m., Riley is seen again on additional security footage from another business walking alone. Eventually, he's seen crossing First Avenue North to Gay Street, walking behind a large group of people. He's seen checking his phone, going to change directions, and then turning back around and following the group again. Unfortunately, the area he went missing is pretty close to the Cumberland River, which authorities are now searching to see if he possibly went into the water that night. But so far, absolutely no trace of Riley has been found. By the time authorities started searching for him, his phone had already been shut off. But Verizon has confirmed that the last known location of his phone was less than a mile from a cell tower located at 19 Oldham Street. According to Google Maps, this is about a 35-minute walk from the bar or about a 10-minute drive. Nashville police have searched that area, but they found nothing. It's also come to light that 2 separate homeless encampments have confirmed that they saw Riley that night. However, there's still no sign of him. Luke Bryan has since released this statement urging anyone to come forward and help. The Tennessee Alcoholic Beverage Commission is currently investigating if Riley was overserved the night he went missing, as many people think this was the case based on how he was walking in the surveillance videos. A lot of people are also questioning if Riley may have been drugged that night, but Luke's 32 Bridge has since released this statement about Riley from the night he went missing. They say he was served 1 alcoholic beverage and 2 waters, and they did say that he was kicked out, but they haven't said why. Riley went missing in an extremely popular area, and that night specifically, a lot of people were out and walking around. He's also 6'5", so it seems like he would have stood out if you saw him. His family has reportedly checked every jail, morgue, and ER in the area, and Riley isn't at any of them. Riley is really close with his mom and talks to her at least 3 to 4 times a day, so the fact that it's now been a week with no contact is really concerning. Authorities are hoping that his Apple Watch contains any information that can help locate him. Now they're just waiting for that information to come through. In the meantime, if you have any information about the disappearance of Riley Strain, please contact the number on the screen.
I'm sorry, if a male teacher had done this to a 14-year-old girl, we would be calling for his head. But when an attractive woman does it to a 14-year-old boy, y'all let her go because she's too pretty for jail? I'm sorry, that makes no sense. Deborah LaFave was 23 years old in the summer of 2003 when she got married to Owen LaFave. She was in her 2nd year of teaching at Greco Middle School near Tampa, Florida, when she crossed the biggest line any sane person would know not to, costing her everything but nothing at the same time. It is almost the end of the school year, and Deborah has had her creepy eye on a 14-year-old student. His name is not public, but we're gonna call him Jake. He's a really popular athletic kid, but let's put an emphasis on kid. Please remember that. Jake and his class are on a field trip to SeaWorld, and it is the last week of school, so I guess Deborah wanted to shoot her shot real quick, and on the bus ride back to the school, she made conversation with him. Jake said it wasn't anything exciting, she was just trying to get to know him, and she offered him and his friends to hang out at her classroom after school. Deborah would start wearing tight dresses, short skirts, basically what a teacher should not wear as a professional, in front of Jake. There was a particular day that Jake was alone with Deborah in the classroom, and she told him, "I have feelings for you. You make me smile so much, I just cannot control my feelings towards you anymore." Then she proceeds to give him a kiss on the lips. Her student, her 14-year-old student. I'm sorry, that's crazy. Think about this though. A 14-year-old middle school boy just got kissed by a hot teacher. This boy is excited. It's wrong, but he is excited. He calls his cousin, we're gonna call him Caleb. He tells him, "A hot teacher likes me," but Caleb did not believe him, and Jake said, "Okay, I'll prove it to you." So Caleb lives in Ocala and Jake lives in Tampa. It's about like an hour away from each other, and Jake had went to go spend the first week of summer up in Ocala with Caleb. During this week, Deborah called Jake multiple times telling him she missed him, when can I see you? Meanwhile, Caleb is literally listening into all these calls. On June 3rd, Deborah picked up Caleb and Jake, brought them back to her condo in Tampa, and then watched a movie with them, but that's not the nasty part. She leaves Caleb in the living room and she tells Jake, "Follow me." She brings him upstairs to her room where the sheets were already off, and she starts making out with him. She pulls back and she's like, "Do you want it?" Not it, but it. Because she did mention she's on her period, but still, that's ill. She puts her mouth on him, but doesn't let him reach climax, because even worse, when they're on the way back home, she makes Caleb drive her car, and then they go into the back seat where she continues doing the same thing to the point where that he reaches climax in her mouth. That is disgusting. She drops him off back home, and then on June 13th, she asks Jake, "Hey, do you want to help me clean out my classroom?" For what? I don't know. I wouldn't want to go back to school if I literally just ended it a couple days ago. But yeah, obviously he's down, so he gets dropped off, and after cleaning up for a bit, they're sitting on the couch, and then and Deborah goes on top of his lap, and then they start making out again. She asks him if he's ready, knowing damn well what he means, and he says yes. She takes her pants off, revealing some special undergarments that she probably wore for him, and then she proceeds to take his part and inserts it into her part, where he ended up ejaculating inside of her. She has to know that's not right. This is all happening within like the same week, by the way, because on June 15th, 2 days later, she picks him up again. By the way, he is back in Tampa now, so yay, close proximity. She drives back to Ocala with Jake this time to go pick up Caleb, when she makes him drive again. During that drive, I'm Caleb. This is my position. Deborah's head is right here. Jake is on top of her, and they're doing it. And then he inside of her again. Caleb literally said that he was able to see her legs in the air on this side, and he heard her making noises. That is disgusting. At this point, Deborah gave no care about her husband at home, because literally a couple days after that, she goes back to Ocala with Jake, making Caleb do the exact same thing. This time, Caleb drove to a family park. He gets out of the car and lets them do what we can all assume was done. He was a pawn in a dangerous game. Deborah performed orally on him and then made him insert himself into her, where he ejaculated for the 3rd time. She dropped Caleb back in Ocala and then dropped Jake off at his house in Tampa. But that was the night that loose mouths finally got Deborah caught. Caleb's neighbor had told his mom that she had seen him getting in the car with a older woman dressed pretty provocatively, and when she questioned Caleb about it, he managed to lie his way out of it. But then she heard Caleb on the phone with a friend saying how Jake had with a hot teacher. And oh boy, did that stir the pot, because Caleb's mom called Jake's mom. Jake went into detail about the things that Deborah would do for him and the things she would do to him. How she'd drive hours to and from Ocala and have sex with her every single time they met. How they'd spend hours on the phone with each other. He even remembered specific details about her body, like the bikini line or even the belly piercing that she had. Apparently, Deborah told Jake that she got turned on thinking about the forbidden nature of the relationship, so clearly she knows that she's not doing something right. Police began recording Jake's call to Deborah, where they would talk about like whether or not he should wear condoms. But she was like, no, don't worry about that. I mean, we can all see how that is wrong, right? They made plans to meet up with each other on June 21st, but the police were there waiting for her, and when she arrived, she got arrested. During the trial, Jake's mom did not want him to testify because this case had become pretty publicly known. There was already so much like hate, just bad energy coming towards Jake, and she didn't want that for her son. So they actually agreed to a plea deal. Deborah's lawyer actually told the judge, man, she's just too pretty for jail. Well, actually, the exact words he said were, to place Deborah in a woman's penitentiary, to place an attractive woman in that type of hellhole, is like putting a raw meat in the middle of a lion's den. I don't know, pretty women have a evil power that they possess, because after everything that Deborah did, she only got 3 years of house probation and then 7 years on the offender list. No jail time. But to make it even worse, 2 years after that, another judge rejected that plea deal and literally just dropped all her charges, so she has nothing at all anymore on her records. It's crazy, because if that was a man in her position, he would be locked for life. She groomed a 14-year-old boy for weeks and got no consequences out of it, but then in 2007, she started talking to a 17-year-old girl, got arrested, but then got let go again for unsubstantial reasoning. Hello? In 2011, she got remarried and had twin boys, Lord protect them, and now she lives a normal life as Deborah Williams. So if I said that, but literally after she got arrested, Owen LaFave was out, he got a divorce, as he should. I mean, think about it. Do you guys really think that she got what she deserved, or is going behind bars what she needs to face her actions? I think so. And as a teacher too, shouldn't there be like more psychological tests to prevent things like this from happening? If I had a son or a daughter at the age of 14 getting manipulated into by a teacher, I would probably knock them into a jail cell myself. But as always, please be safe out there, and I will see y'all in the next insane crime story.
Ugh, no, this is weird. Weird behavior, weird. Imagine meeting a 50-year-old man. He says, hi, I'm a 200-year-old vampire with superpowers, and I want to start a cult for my own pleasure and my own sick desires. We're probably going to be here for a while, and you're probably going to be really uncomfortable throughout the entire thing. Did you miss me? Bailey Boswell was born and raised in Iowa, and she faced her first hard time at a very young age. At only 2 years old, she lost her father. He was unalived, which I imagine changed a lot for her family. In school, Bailey looked to have a very promising future. She was a top athlete at her school. She played basketball and ran track. She was even offered a college basketball scholarship, but unfortunately, to cope with the difficult aspects of her life, Bailey turned to substance use, and that pretty much took over the kind of person that she would grow up to be in a very negative way. She ended up marrying a man called Freddie, and their relationship was every kind of toxic you can think of. He was horrible to her, emotionally, physically, and Bailey and Freddie had a daughter together, but they lost custody over her as it was deemed that neither of them were fit to take care of her. And the baby was placed under the custody of Bailey's parents. By the age of 22, Bailey had been in trouble with the law quite a bit, and she was in a pretty low point of her life. This is when she turned to a website called Backpage. Backpage was like an advertisement website, kind of like Craigslist, and Bailey got on that website because she was looking for a sugar daddy. This is when she would meet a man that would refer to himself as a vampire sugar daddy, Aubrey Clifton Trail. Aubrey's life was also hard from the beginning. When he was only 2 years old, he became a victim at the hands of his parents. They neglected him, disregarded him, didn't care for him, and abused him. So much so that his grandfather stepped in to help. However, shortly after, he was placed back in the custody of his parents, and Aubrey ended up running away. Aubrey bounced back and forth between different foster homes and different juvenile facilities, but he soon started getting in trouble with the law for committing petty crimes. Aubrey Trail ended up in jail for robbery, and from then on, he was in and out of jail over 20 times. By 2016, Aubrey was 50 years old, and he decided that it would be a good idea to get on Backpage. This is how he would meet 22-year-old Bailey Boswell. The two would connect, go on a first date, and Aubrey pretty much was like, I'm a nice guy, I'm respectful, and I have money. You seem like a nice girl. I like spending time with you, and you need money. Perfect. So the two of them started dating, and I think at first, maybe it was a fine relationship. Bailey moved in with Aubrey into his apartment in Wilbur, Nebraska, and the two of them started their life together of doing illegal things and scamming people. Their source of income was literally targeting vulnerable people and scamming them out of hundreds of thousands of dollars. Sooner than later, Aubrey sat Bailey down and said, hey, listen, darling, there's something I need to tell you. I am actually a 200-year-old vampire. Don't tell anyone, but I am. I can do a lot of things. I can read minds, I can fly, I drink blood, and one of my favorite things in the entire world is witchcraft. So I was thinking, because I'm very attracted by witches, I would like to start a coven. I will be the leader, I will be the head vampire because I am, and I will name you my head witch. And then we can go out and search for more witches and bring them into our coven. The witches will be for me to fulfill my sick and twisted desires and fetishes, and it'll be great. What do you think? And Bailey said, love that. Let's do it. I'm just kidding. I don't know how supportive she really was, but the point is she was supportive because that's exactly what they did. And how exactly were they going to find vulnerable girls to lure them into joining this witch cult? Well, that's easy. Tinder. And to any young listeners that I have, do not talk to people that you don't know on the internet. Don't do it. You never know their intentions. Listen to your parents. Don't talk to anyone on the internet. Stay away from it, actually. Anyway, their plan was to find girls on Tinder. Bailey would be the one with the profile who would match with the girls. It would be her picture, but under a different name. She would take them out on dates, pretend that everything was normal until she had their attention and broke the ice, and then she would loop in Mr. Head Vampire. The rules that they decided their witches were gonna have in this coven were that they would do absolutely anything and everything that Aubrey wanted at all times in the bedroom with both himself and Bailey. They would have, oh my god, this makes me sick. They would have to call Aubrey daddy and Bailey mommy. They would have to check in with Aubrey every single hour of every single day so he always knew where they were and what they were doing. They would have to ask permission to do absolutely anything. They were not allowed to talk to any man ever. They had to move into their apartment and were barely ever allowed to leave. They had to do all the house chores, cooking, cleaning, everything, and they had to do all of that while wearing nothing. I'm sorry, what the Their first victim that we know of was in 2017. This girl was 22 years old and she had found herself at a point in her life where she needed help. She was struggling to pay her bills. She had big hopes of becoming a nurse, so she needed money to be able to pay for the school, etc., but that was hard because she was unemployed. She had family problems. She was struggling. She matches with Bailey on Tinder. They hit it off. Bailey introduces her to Aubrey, and then the brainwashing begins. Bailey was in this girl's ear telling her how amazing Aubrey was, about how he was her sugar daddy, and about how he could be her sugar daddy too. Aubrey told her that he could fund her lifestyle, give her a weekly allowance, and he even told her that he would pay to put her through nursing school. They told her that all she needed to do in return was join their witch cult. and the 500 million other rules they had, but obviously they didn't break that up at first. And just like that, she was wrapped up in the nightmare that living with Bailey and Aubrey was. And she followed every single rule that I mentioned to you, and throughout it all, Bailey and Aubrey started to tell her their secrets, that Aubrey was a 200-year-old vampire. And they found another victim through Tinder, an 18-year-old vulnerable girl. So now there's Bailey, the 22-year-old girl, and an 18-year-old girl. And things are progressing like this for a little bit, but then, of course, it goes from bad to worse. Aubrey says, I have an idea. Ugh, I hate when Aubrey has ideas. He says, there's this new thing that I really like the sound of, something that you all can help me with. I would like to find someone for the sole purpose of ending their life. I want to end their life brutally. I want to do things such as cut their eyelids off and record it. And then I plan on selling the recording and selling it for $1 million, and we can all split the money. And if you guys help me with this will be the one sacrifice that you need to truly, really become a witch. What do you think? I mean, how truly broken is his head? He's literally so messed up in the head, it's not even funny. It took a while, but thankfully, eventually, the 18-year-old girl and the 22-year-old girl realized that this was wrong, realized that Aubrey and Bailey were terrible people, and they left the cult. I'm not sure exactly how, but they did manage to leave. It wasn't long until they found another victim, a 21-year-old girl, and the exact same thing happened to her. She was treated like trash and had to wear a pink dog collar, and only a dog collar. Eventually, it also became too much for her, and she managed to escape as well. Now we get to Aubrey and Bailey's final victim, a sweet, sweet girl called Sydney Loof. Sydney was born and raised in Nebraska. She had a brother and a little sister, and she was known for her bright, bubbly personality and her kind heart. Her parents adored her. They adored all of their kids, and they were always there to support her with anything and everything. Ask anyone who knew her, and they would describe Sydney as compassionate, free-spirited, and someone who loved animals and the outdoors. After high school, Sydney moved to Lincoln and got an apartment by herself as well as with a little kitten, and she got a job working at the Menards hardware store. She was an independent girl who balanced having a job as well as keeping up with her social life very well. That said, she was a 24-year-old girl. She was on social media, and one of those apps included Tinder, where she would have the misfortune of crossing paths with Bailey and eventually with Aubrey. On Tinder, Sydney matched with Bailey, and again, Bailey was using her picture but under a fake name, and she agreed to go on a first date with her on November 14th of 2017. That date was apparently one that Sydney enjoyed. She told her friends about this super cool girl that she had met, and she told them that it went so well that the very next date they had their second date planned. Right before leaving to that second date, Sydney took a Snapchat picture that said, "Ready for my date." While she was getting ready, Aubrey and Bailey are seen on CCTV footage stopping at a Home Depot buying different tools, which I think it's safe to say they were planning on using those on Sydney. And they were seen at a different store buying trash bags and cleaning supplies, and then yet at another store buying more things such as a weed cutter and food grinders. And then they were seen at Menards, at Sydney's place of work, buying chemical drainer, an electrical cord, and duct tape. And then it was time for Bailey and Sydney to go on their second date. The next day, November 16th, Sydney failed to show up for work, which was very unlike her, and her mom got really concerned when she couldn't get a hold of her. So she called the police and asked them to do a welfare check. Police arrived at Sydney's apartment. She wasn't there, but there was no signs of a struggle. But what they did notice is that Sydney's car was there, her purse was there, her glasses were there, and her cat was also there, and it had not been fed. And that was the most alarming part to Sydney's family, because Sydney cared about that cat like it was her child. There was absolutely no way that she would leave the cat alone, one, but even less of a chance that she would leave the cat with no food. Sydney Loof was officially reported as a missing person, and the search for her began. Her friends and family doing everything possible to spread awareness. They began to raise money. They made pages for her on social media, and it was all hands on deck to find Sydney. Days later, one of Sydney's close friends named Brooklyn was trying to think of what she could do to help get them to Sydney, and she remembered this girl that Sydney had told them about and remembered that she was supposed to go on a date the night she went missing with said girl. Brooklyn had seen a picture of Bailey before because Sydney had shown her, and she was trying to find her on social media but couldn't find her, of course, because we know Bailey's Tinder account was under a fake name. So Brooklyn, the genius that she is, decided to make a Tinder profile for herself, one that looked a lot like Sydney's profile, and started to swipe trying to match with this mystery girl, and she did. Bailey, under her fake account, matched with Brooklyn's fake account. Brooklyn messages Bailey asking for her phone number so that they could set up a date. Bailey, being an idiot, gave her phone number, thankfully, and Brooklyn ran to the police station with that phone number. This is how police were able to make the connection that the person who Sydney went on a date with the night that she went missing was a lady named Bailey Boswell, and they find out that her roommate is a 50-year-old man named Aubrey Trail. Police get the address, they go to Bailey and Aubrey's apartment. It's completely empty and it reeks of bleach. Could not be more suspicious. Shortly after that, they are both named as persons of interest in the disappearance of Sydney Loof, so their faces are everywhere. everywhere, all over the news, and they are on the run. And then guys, I'm not even being funny, Aubrey and Bailey decide that they wanted to clear their name, right? So they take a video of themselves and they say, hey guys, we do know Sydney. Bailey did go on a date with Sydney, but then she did drop her off at her friend's house. Since then, we have not seen Sydney, and we feel for her family. We really do. We hope that she's found safely, but we do not like and enjoy watching our names get wrecked on social media. So we wanted to come online and let you guys know that we're not guilty. We didn't do anything. So if you guys could please stop with the hate comments, that would be so awesome. Sorry. On November 30th, police were able to track them down at a motel and they were arrested and taken into custody. Days after, police receive a call from someone calling to report that they found human remains. Sydney Loof's body was found in a rural area of Clay County, Nebraska, and I'm going to describe how it was found, so warning if you have a queasy stomach. Body parts had been separated and discarded off in 14 different trash bags. Her organs had been removed. The bones in her neck were all crushed and there was bleeding in her eyeballs. One of her earlobes had been torn off. There was evidence of blunt force trauma to the back of her head and evidence of restraints on her wrists. And on another disgusting detail, there was evidence of slashes with a weapon all over Sydney, and Aubrey later told officers that he was, quote, very thirsty that day. So it's believed that Aubrey wanted to act out his sick fantasies of drinking blood because remember, he thinks that he's a vampire, and when they kidnapped Sydney and tied her to a bed, Aubrey acted out his fantasies. Sydney's cause of death was ruled as a homicide, and Aubrey and Bailey were then charged with first-degree murder and improper disposal of human remains. It is truly vile, and it breaks my heart for Sydney's family. Bailey was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and Aubrey was sentenced to death. And I want to end this video by remembering the kind of person that Sydney was. Her family has stated, quote, Sydney has now passed through heaven's pearly gates. She was a lover of the outdoors. She loved to go fishing and also enjoyed a round of golf. She was a caring individual who was known for having a loving, kind heart, as many friends, Menards customers, and fellow employees would attest to. Sydney was also extremely passionate about animals and leaves behind her cat Mimsy. Horrible. Like, no matter how many of these videos I do, I could do 1,000, which is so sad in itself, but every single time it's just as shocking. I cannot believe that there are people in this world that do that. Like, what? I don't know. It's disgusting, but that is all I have for today's video. Thank you guys for spending time with me today. I hope you guys are all having the best day. I really do. If not, I always so serious when I say this. Like, I really hope that if you're not having a good day, you do go out there and do something to make it the best day. Anyway, I love you guys so much, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.